All right, so you've learned a lot so far in this chapter. Um, but actually, I guess I would also argue, if I could just digress a little bit here, that you knew the basic premise of it before you even enrolled in macroeconomics, right? You knew that if the the Bank of Canada lowered interest rates, that would stimulate the economy. Isn't that what we're learning right now? Basically, that through the printing of money, through increasing the money supply, the interest rates decline, and that shifts the aggregate demand curve. That makes us demand more, makes us consume more, buy more vehicles. It makes businesses invest more. In a sense, we already knew that. What we're doing right now is we're just breaking it down and explaining to you how this actually occurs. So, anyways, let's examine this, and well, let's practice this so it comes a little bit more second nature for you. All right, so it says explain how an increase in the money supply affects the money market, the aggregate demand curve. So what is the effect for a closed economy first? Okay, so let's talk about a closed economy first. All right, so we have a certain amount of money supply. We're at MS1, we're at A right now on the left-hand side. We have an interest rate R1. And when the government or the Bank of Canada, in this case, we're talking about monetary policy, is concerned about the economy, they would like to have the aggregate demand curve shift to the right. We'd like people demanding more goods. There's not enough demand in the economy. And so what do? First step is they inject money into the economy. They increase the money supply. And we can see immediately that that has an effect on interest rates. So they brought down interest rates. Now, when we think about aggregate demand and the components of aggregate demand, and let's just imagine here we're in a closed economy right now. Closed economy. If we lower interest rates, what are these going to affect in a closed economy? What components? You got it, right? C and I. Consume more, buy cars, 0% interest, buy more new furniture, do this, businesses, go out and invest. Interest rates are low. Go start a business. Anyways, so we see that we have an increase in the money supply and that drops down the interest rate, and all of a sudden aggregate demand is going to shift to the right. But again, you probably knew, you had this idea before. We're going to demand more goods now. So anyway, so as we demand more goods, then what's going to happen? Well, we're going to demand more money because we're demanding more goods. Now we're demanding more money because we need money to pay for these goods. So the demand for money is going to go up, and that's going to bring that interest rate up a little bit. All right. So there's going to be a partial reversal of the interest rate decline and a smaller than otherwise increased output. So the output wouldn't increase as much as it would have because the interest rates went up a little bit. Okay, so anyway, so this is a closed economy. What we see in a closed economy that does not actually even have net exports, sorry for having that there, this is a closed economy, that's going to impact, a reduction in the interest rate is going to impact consumption and investment. Let's examine an open economy. Now, I suppose the only difference, and you know what this is because you've already studied, but the only difference really is that we factor in the exchange rate. We add in net exports. Because the idea behind it is if we lower the interest rates, that lowers the value of the dollar. And so we're even going to demand even more because the exchange rate takes a hit. The exchange rate goes down, but that makes foreigners buy more of our goods, and it makes Canadians buy more of our goods as well instead of foreign goods because it's cheaper to do so. And foreign goods become more expensive. So in a closed economy, the reduction in interest rates affect C and affect I, but in an open economy, there's also the effect of the lower interest rates hitting the currency, and that will, actually it's a positive thing when it hits the currency, right? Currency goes down in value. That can be a positive thing. Net exports go way up. And we get even a further shift in aggregate demand. All right, guys, so let's do number 2. What is the effect of an increase in the money supply for a small open economy? Well, when we're talking about an open economy now, we really have to think about the world rate, the global interest rate out there from countries that are like ours, that have assets that are very similar to ours in terms of the amount of risk, etc. So anyways, we have to think about that. So anyways, so what happens? Obviously, just like, before, obviously the Bank of Canada is not very happy with the level of aggregate demand. They want to increase aggregate demand, so they print some money. And they increase the money supply, and that immediately brings down the interest rate. And of course, we know that this is going to affect C and I, right? It's gonna affect C and I. And anyways, so that's great. And so it does. And we start demanding more goods and services. So that's great. That worked. Businesses are investing. Consumers are buying cars and things like that. They need money to do that. So that's one thing. The money demand actually increases a little bit. And that's going to actually revert some of the decreases in the interest rates, and we'll actually go up, from R2 to R3. And that does mean that the aggregate demand curve didn't shift as much as it could have. But anyways, one of the problems, though, however, for this is that the R3, the prevailing interest rate at that level, at point B, is still below the world rate. Well, what does that mean? Well, according to perfect capital mobility, if we have freedom of capital, capital can move in from foreigners into Canada, and it can move out at their whim, according to the theory of interest rate parity. If you have perfect capital mobility, what will happen is foreigners, because the interest rate that you're paying them for their bonds is not that good. It's at R3. It's below the world rate. So they're going to start selling their bonds and buying bonds in other countries that are paying a higher interest rate. And so they are demanding less Canadian dollars. They sell their Canadian bonds, they take their cash, they convert it into US dollars, and they buy US bonds. So that's going to hurt the Canadian dollar. Why? Well, the foreigners are not demanding Canadian dollars anymore. They're getting out of Canada. They're going somewhere else. So what happens to the Canadian dollar? The Canadian dollar takes a hit. All right. So when the Canadian dollar takes a hit, is that good for the economy, for the Canadian economy, or bad for the Canadian economy? Well, that's a complicated question. Perhaps I should just be phrasing it. Is it good for aggregate demand? Well, yeah. Well, and it's because of NX, right? Net exports. As the Canadian dollar goes down, foreigners find Canadian goods cheaper. And Canadians also buy more Canadian goods because foreign products become more expensive. So what we see is an even further shift in the aggregate demand because of that hit on the exchange rate caused by the reduction of the interest rates. All right. And so basically, as long as our interest rates are below the world rate, as long as we're at R3, what's going to happen is foreigners will continue to sell Canadian financial assets and getting out of Canada and going somewhere where they are getting paid the world rate. And this will happen over and over and over again. People will continue to sell those Canadian bonds, foreigners will, getting out of Canadian dollar, and it'll continue to happen until the prevailing interest rate equals the world rate. So we're going to end up at point C eventually in an open economy. Eventually. But anyways, as you can see, in an open economy, the reduction in the interest rate from the increase in the money supply has a greater effect in an open economy than a closed economy.